Hey everyone, welcome to season 12 of the Tension Podcast. We're a show that acknowledges most of life and faith is lived in the tension between the two extremes. Each week we look at what many of us were taught growing up in evangelical churches. We weigh it against what our current culture is saying, and we try to find what Jesus has for us in the tension between the two. If we haven't met, my name is Jonathan Carone, and we're joined as always by our co-host, Mr. Eric Williams. Eric, go ahead and say hey to the people.
Hey, welcome. We're back at it again. Season 12, we're right in our adolescence, starting to go through puberty here, having all those awkward feelings in our bodies.
We're recording this. I looked at my Facebook memories this morning, and we're recording this on the day that I first started working on, like doing the actual work on the first ever logo of Unlearning Youth Group 4 years ago, which is crazy to think that it was 4 years ago. So, yeah, season 12. It's been
so
a ride.
thanks for being with us, guys. Thanks for being with us, gender neutral guys and women,
Bros,
dudes.
bros and dudes are gender neutral at this point. Well, hey, if you're new to us, this season is all about the honest conversations I think people are feeling but aren't necessarily having with other people. If you have been with us in the past, you know that I typically like to incorporate stats that go with like American church history or just things in general to give us a more full, well-rounded picture when we talk about the climate we're in the evangelical church today. But this season, we're not doing that. I'm purposely not looking up stats or doing any research for most of these episodes. Our notes that we go off of, because I'm typically pretty scripted in terms of like where we want to take a show. Eric doesn't look at the notes. I say that just to get his reaction. He looks at them. The contributing to them is the different story. But we all know and love Eric, and we know that if Eric writes it down, it's not as good. It's got to come off Eric's head for it to be good.
That's right. That's right.
In 12 seasons, we've learned each other.
I forget what I said the moment I say it. The best thing you're going to hear from me is off the cuff, right off the bat.
So the goal for this season is to have conversations, not teach lessons. So they might be more messy. They might take more time to get to the point, but they're going to be honest. They're going to be vulnerable, and they're going to be open, because I think that's what we need more of in the church today. And if you're watching on YouTube, I was just very serious there while Eric is holding back this giggle that I could see that he wanted to let out, but he's doing his best little kid in church to not let the giggle out.
I'm good, man. I just
you sure?
Put my hand over my mouth. If I'm, it'll be like the NFL. I'll just hold up a playbook. I need to print out the notes, and I can just hold the notes up. That would be great.
You can tell it's our first day back recording after a while. All right, before we get into today's topic, at the end of this season, we are going to be hitting our 100th episode. For that episode, we want to celebrate the impact this show has had on people. So to do that, we want to share stories straight from you. That requires you sending in those stories. So there's 3 ways for you to do that. You can write a story up and send it to us through email, hello@tensionpodcast.com. You can record an audio message on your phone and send it to hello@tensionpodcast.com, or you can send it to me on Instagram at Jonathan_Carone. The other way you can do is you can record a video message and email those to us, or send them to me on Instagram as well. I would love to see a video, but I know that's a little too intimate for some people. So writing an email, recording audio message, doing a video, whatever works for you. But in the message, we would love to hear how an episode made you think about something in a new way, how it encouraged you and made you feel like you weren't alone, or how it helped you have conversations with others about hard topics. Some of the things you all have told us in the past, we just want to share those, because honestly, this podcast gets really hard to do at times. And for our 100th show, we just want to celebrate the good things that have happened over the last 4 years.
Yeah. I think too, to step into some of that hard feeling is that you kind of, and this is a conversation I've had with a lot of people that listen, a lot of friends that I know that listen, and it's like, we feel like we don't really have a home because the mainline church crowd, as we've talked about so many times, is so defensive on some of these things. So you even talk about deconstruction, or you talk about questioning certain things, and you kind of get excommunicated from that crowd of people. But then, it's like, I'm not really ready to dive full into the people who, like I had one of my friends say that he says, at this point, I feel like he said, I'm a hopeful agnostic. And like, we used to do ministry together and things like that. It's like, I'm not there yet, man. Like I still love Jesus, and I love, I just, right now, I'm not. I think that the church and some of the things in the culture just got some things to figure out. And I think that there's a pocket of people that feel the same way. And I think, some of the political conversations we've been having put some like a tangible piece to that. So because if you bring up a topic like women's reproductive rights, or something else, it's like all of a sudden you're stepping into things that your faith intersects with that may or may not follow the dogmatic beliefs of your upbringing. But also at the same time, it's like swinging to the other side. I'm just not sure that I'm ready to jump over there either. There's this pocket that I think some might call it a tension in between the two extremes. Um, that that yeah, I mean, but it gets tense, and we feel like we don't have a home. So like, I just want to say to the listeners, like, thank you for coming along this ride and participating back and letting me know that I'm not crazy. That you feel the
Or
same
you're
way.
just as crazy as us in the same route. So
Yeah, I'm
one of
not
my
the only
favorite
one
reviews,
that's
we just got
crazy.
this recently. It's from my roommate in college's wife. She wrote, I didn't want to like or even listen to this podcast. My husband is a friend with the host, but I'm hooked. Thanks for talking about many of the topics that have rubbed me the wrong way in church, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why something seemed off. So if that's not the epitome of our show, you didn't want to listen in the first place. You don't know why you did, but for some reason we've been able to kind of pinpoint something you've been feeling. That's us. And that's what this entire season is about. So I want to go ahead and introduce the topic for today, and then we're going to get into that conversation. If you read the title of the show, you kind of know what it is. But I've been thinking more and more of this over the last 6 months, and then with the election. And I think a lot of people might be in the same boat. And that's the idea that I would trust Jesus more if it didn't require trusting other people.
Yep.
And with that idea comes a confession. Every single time I have done the whole whatever you say, wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to do type of thing with Jesus, I have experienced significant hurt from his followers. Sometimes that was intentionally, but most often that hurt was unintentionally. And to give you an idea, I'm going to run through some stuff. As I was writing this episode, I thought through different key aspects of my life the last 15 to 20 years where I've told Jesus I was all in and then something happened. And the first most formative one probably was when I just graduated college in undergrad, and I had finally started opening up myself to the idea that ministry might be where Jesus was leading me to. The very first thing that happened after that was the girl I thought I was going to marry strung me along for an entire summer and then dumped me on the day before grad school started when she got back to campus. And it was because I started getting a little more serious about my life, and she was still an undergrad and didn't want to be that serious. And so it scared her. So it
Yikes.
ended up being a very great thing to happen because I'd be divorced by now if we would have stayed together. But the pain I experienced after that and because of that is something that will stick with me forever. The first time I stepped out and did something truly risky to go into ministry was a summer internship with a church. I found out a couple weeks before I was supposed to leave that the funding had fallen through and I wouldn't be doing it. They strung me along for a few weeks and then told me at the last minute that the funding fell through. That ended up being a good thing because the pastor of the church was having an affair, but it led me to scrambling for a summer job and being stuck in a bad experience for that summer. I had fought ministry for so long. And now that I accepted it, I'd gone through a year of seminary. I was back doing what I was doing before, but in a worse spot. And so that sounds trivial here at 38, but at 22, it was really frustrating. Once I did go into ministry and I worked my butt off for 3.5 years, a new executive pastor came in and demoted me after I had asked for help because I was drowning. It was unintentional. He didn't realize he was demoting me. There was some bad communication within our previous staff, and he didn't know what he was doing. But how would a 26-year-old who has ambitions, who has been working their butt off, experience that demotion?
Hmm.
It led to 18 months of really hard and painful work dynamics, most of which I screwed up on my own. But then I got coached off staff a week after finding out we were pregnant with our first kid.
Yep.
Like the other things, like it worked out for good, but it hurt to go through. And then the last thing I'll tell you is, like 5 years ago, we moved back to the town that we grew up in, and we did that because we thought we'd be a part of some new church movement here in our town. Like our county is 78% conservative, and there's never been a church I felt comfortable in this town. And we were excited to be a part of that when we came back. And at every turn since then, there have been roadblocks, most of which were unintentional. But now we're 5.5 years later living in a town both of us don't want to be living in, wondering why the heck we're here. I mean, there have been good parts to us being back for sure. There are good parts right now for us being back. But following Jesus here has been very painful. So it leaves me with this idea that I would trust Jesus a whole lot more if trusting him didn't require me to trust his followers as well.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I've got similar situations as I think back. In fact, you're like telling the story, and I'm like, reliving different moments, especially on the like, what Jesus, whatever you have for me, whatever you want me to do. I mean, I never wanted to get into ministry. I was starting my first career was in sport management and program management. I worked for a nonprofit and worked, all those things. But it was like, I was always just the super volunteer at a church, or, part of a church plant and other things like that. It was like, I was never going to be, I never wanted to make ministry the source of my income was what it was, and then the church that I was volunteering for, and one of the ministry leaders that I really respected and really looked up to, he was going to be the campus pastor of a new campus, and he said we would love to have you on the team. Think about it and everything like that. And it was one of those immediate, my brain was like no, like no, and then something said yes, one of those moments, and that led to some really good things. But in the same way, the just the interpersonal strife that happened through all of that, and seeing that there are broken people that run churches and have to trust the backstabbing and being in those 2 a.m. conversations during church conferences, where one staff member who thinks that they're going to be the next lead pastor is trying to gather up people and, all these other sorts of things. And it's like, you start to step back and go, man, this is not what I thought I was going to sign up for. And there's a lot of backstabbing and a lot of, church hurt coming from people. And so I think that's when you hear that a lot, it's like, oh, the church didn't hurt you, people hurt you. Yeah. But the church, capital C, is the people. Of course, the building didn't hurt me. I mean, I guess if you were to be like, oh yeah, I got a lot of church hurt. What was that? Oh, well, the building actually fell down on top of me. Yeah. Like, okay, then yes, you're right. You had church building hurt. But no, the organization of the church hurt me. I mean, like I got counseled off staff in my first church because of a word I used in an email that all of a sudden triggered a legal questions about how things were running. And then immediately people that I'd been friends with and, quote unquote, done life with now aren't talking to me and were advised by counsel not to talk to me. And it's like, what? Where on earth?
But we're full of grace and acceptance and
all of that sort of thing. And so it's like, okay, the way that things are handled, swept under the rug. And even if we're not talking about major, major controversies or illegal actions, even if you're not talking about that, just basic ways of interacting with people, become very, very messy when you have to trust human beings in the church.
And I think that's where the conversation gets missed a lot of times, because when people say they've been hurt by the church, when you're a part of the church, it's oftentimes gets very defensive with that.
Right.
And that's why I want to frame it this way. It's like, I don't have a problem trusting Jesus. I know he's good. Even when it hurts to go through and I don't understand it, there's a piece there that I intellectually and emotionally know he's good and that it's going to
Yep.
work out for my good.
Yep.
It's just the people dynamic of it all, because they're just as messy as I am.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest, this is going to sound very egotistical, but if I'm at a point where I'm saying, whatever you say, wherever you want me to go, I'll do it. The reality is most people in church aren't in that spot.
Mm.
And so you're being hurt unintentionally by people who are on a different journey than you are, but doing it in the same name that you are.
Right.
And that comes back to, it's like, I get it. I understand, but I don't, understanding something doesn't make it hurt any less. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I've had to come to grips with as I've gotten older, because I was always the guy who intellectualized my feelings. Like, if I can understand it, then I can move on. And I
Sure.
never gave myself the space to feel my feelings, because I didn't want to, because I didn't want to feel disappointment or hurt or anything like that. But as I've learned how healthy it is to feel what you need to feel, I've had to learn that understanding my feelings doesn't make them hurt less. It just makes you
Mm-hmm.
understand them more.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's a good call out on the other people around. It's like they're not part of that. We all have this assumed social contract that we've signed when we get into the church, because we think we're all part of the same organization, same plan, under the Bible, or even just like, as we've talked about before, like under the teaching of a particular leader or lead pastor, right? Ignoring the fact that gets into cultish territory and things like that. But like, then you realize, oh, that's not, and I mean, I had a former colleague who I, again, would consider a friend, where, he was talking about it when people leave the church staff, and how, when you've had a friend on staff with you at a job, forget church, and then they leave, and then it's like, oh, we're going to stick together, we're going to stay in touch, blah, 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 blah. And then you just never talk to them again. And, it feels like it hurts more in the church. But he was telling me, he's like, if most of your interactions, if you didn't interact before you got on staff together, and most of your interactions are about work and during work, then when you leave and you've broken that bond of work, you're probably not, and it's okay not to be in contact with one another. It's like
That doesn't mean it
that
doesn't hurt. It's
right,
just,
but that
it's
opened my eyes to
understandable.
that opened my eyes to that sense of like an uneven balance of agreement, where there's this like unspoken understood agreement that, like, oh, we're friends, we're going to be friends whether or not we go to this church, or whether or not we're on staff, or whether or not this. But in reality, that's not actually the case, because the thing that binds you together is your proximity, as opposed to anything else. And so it's like, oh man, that hurts, because your expectation, there's that expectation gap, because between what expectation is and reality. So in the church, I expected grace, and I expected understanding, and I expected civility, and what I got was very different.
And the part that I've come to learn as I've thought through this conversation is, so, we're always taught, when someone hurts you, or like, approach them, tell them what happened, so that they can have the opportunity to ask for forgiveness, and you have the opportunity to forgive them, because healing comes in confession and forgiveness. We know that. I believe that to be true. The unspoken part of that, though, is, just because we have forgiven someone, just because we have been forgiven by someone, and just because we've been healed by it, doesn't mean that the memory or the pain goes away. There are still scars there mentally, emotionally, hopefully not physically, but some cases physically as well, that will be reminders forever. And I think about my experience when I left church staff, and we stayed in Knoxville for another 4.5 years after that. And when we realized we were leaving to come back to North Carolina, the first thing I did was email that pastor who coached me off staff and said, "Hey, can we clear the air before I leave? Because I don't want to leave town with this hanging over me." And he, like, to his credit, he cleared his schedule and had lunch with me that day.
Mm.
And we had like an hour and a half talk about all the things he thought I did, all the things, like, I told him all the things I thought he did. And like, I owned some stuff. He owned some stuff. He asked for forgiveness. I asked for forgiveness. Like, we both gave forgiveness to each other. We hugged before we left. Like, as healthy of a reconciliation as could have been hoped for.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm 10 years after leaving that staff, 12 years after many of the bad things happen, and I still have those memories pop in my head.
Yeah.
I still have relational feelings that I think back to, that, like, that still hurt. Things that were said about me, things that were said to me. I have feelings of, like, I thought it was going to be this and it was actually that.
Mm-hmm.
Or for anyone who's been on staff at a church or been in the leadership role, you know what this is. I thought I was good enough or wired enough to do this thing. And I was told that, no, I'm not good enough, when in reality, I just wasn't a fit for the culture of that thing. It's not that I didn't have the ability to, or didn't have the gift set to do it. And let me be completely transparent here with what I'm talking about. We were a church of multiple venues. We weren't multiple campuses. We were multiple venues. So we had 3 worship environments under the same roof, but they had distinct bands and worship styles and hosts of the room. And when we opened a new one, I wanted to host it. And I I'm pretty good at welcoming people, at announcements, at kind of shepherding through a church service. Like, I wouldn't have had to teach. It was literally like, welcome, announcements, pray, and then at the end, see where the room's at, see what God's doing, and kind of shepherd that towards the end. I'm pretty good at that. But I was told I couldn't do that. I got passed over for that. Strategically, it made sense for why I got passed over, because they wanted to have the middle school and the high school pastor do that, because there were a lot of middle school and high school students coming to that venue. Makes total sense. The way it was communicated to me was the part that hurt.
Yeah.
And was it meant to be hurtful? Absolutely not. But because I didn't fit what was needed at the time, it hurt. And so that's just one example of, like, I went after something I felt God had gifted me in and called me to, and it fell through and didn't happen in a way that hurt.
Mm.
Was it the wrong decision? No, not one bit. I hope you hear that as I'm talking. Like, they made the right decision for that church at that time. I get it. But because the way it was handled relationally, it left a scar that is still with me 12 or 13 years later. So anytime I go after something that I feel God has called me to, has equipped me to, whatever, that is in the back of my mind, because I know that to make it happen, I also have to trust other people to do their part in making it happen as well. And
Yeah.
that's the part that's really hard.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is, like, uh, going with our theme of tension, is there's a tension in trust, because a lot of times we think trust is going to be an all or nothing thing. It's like, I completely trust you, right? So you say, like, if I were to say, Jonathan, I trust you. Well, I think the underlying thing is, like, that is 100. I completely trust you. Now, Jonathan, would I trust you to perform brain surgery on me? No, no, I would not. I'm sorry, I
You would
would not.
not trust me to pitch to you.
I mean, like, But yeah, so think about those things where it's like legitimately, would I trust you to do that? Think about your spouse. It's like I trust my spouse, and then like, oh, I trust her in everything. But it's like, would you try? Think about it. You know, if you're doing a home improvement project and you're holding the nail and she's holding the hammer, no, I don't. I don't. Nope. I wouldn't do that. Right. You know, like whatever. There are increments to trust. And I think, unfortunately, we step into the church world with an all or nothing trust side too. Now, some of it, can we argue that some of it gets gaslit from bad leadership that is like, no, you got to fully trust. You got to fully trust, fully trust, fully trust, fully trust. Because we talk about fully relying on God, trusting, everything like that. But when it comes to people, you can trust in increments or you can trust in certain areas. And I think we conflate that with what you're supposed to like put your trust in Jesus, right? But even then, I think that we've discussed how that can be taken the wrong way because it's like, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Well, I don't know. I'm going to fully trust in Jesus. What?
I'm going
Yeah,
Chick-fil-A.
well, I'm just going to fully trust in Jesus, and so we're going to lie prostrate in front of the Lord until we get a sign and a vision of what is to happen. You know, and it's just like,
Chick-fil-A.
yeah, it's Chick-fil-A. You're like, well, I'm just going to play Oceans in the background until all of a sudden something comes up. It's like, you call me out to have some pot roast, add in corn, no carrots. You know, it's like, what? No, we wouldn't do that. You know, sorry, I don't want to keep going but like, yeah, so we don't fully trust Jesus for all that either. So can we step into some of these areas where it makes sense? And so I think that's the other part of the like, I've left the church and fully quote unquote deconstructed. Well, it's because if I can't trust one instance or one piece of, then I can't trust it all. And it's like, I think I'm in that awkward tension of I still at this point do not trust the church as an institution, as a 501c3, as a hierarchical leadership structure ran by people. I trust Jesus leading his church. You know, I trust my faith. I trust where I'm going to go when I die. I trust that faith, kindness, gentleness, you know, self-control. I trust all of the things that I'm supposed to be um, emulating. Those are things that I can trust. And so I would even say as an encouragement for people that are finding themselves maybe even further on the deconstruction isn't even the right word, but further on the like leaving your faith side, like what is it that you can trust without feeling like you have to trust it all? And
And I mean,
go ahead.
the answer to that question is I trust myself, and I can only trust myself. And so I'm going to leave the organizations that I've trusted in the past, and I'm going to only rely on myself.
Yep.
And I get the draw to that, but I don't trust myself at all.
Right.
Like, I'm really talented. I'm really smart. I'm really capable, but I'm a dick.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when left to my own devices with no, like, I think I'm a really good person right now for the most part,
Mm.
but it's because I've been transformed by the Holy Spirit. I have no doubt in my mind because I know what I want to do naturally.
Yeah.
I know the things I want to say to people naturally and the way I want to respond to them naturally. And so it is the fruit of the spirit, the love, joy, peace, faithfulness, kindness, gentleness, self-control. Oh my goodness. And what I say and what I don't say, like
Right.
if it wasn't for Jesus, like, yeah. So like, I can't be the person who completely leaves and only trust myself, but I have a really hard time doing the whole wherever you go, whatever you say type of thing.
Right.
But and here's where it also plays out. Like we're like this is coming out in February. We're recording it in January. January through March are my slow months as a business. Like the past couple of years, I've been down 10 to 20% year over year by June, and then make up that 10 to 15% in the back half of the year. It's just the way that randomly my business works. So I trust Jesus to provide financially and business wise, because he's shown over and over and over he will again. But when we talk about going out and doing something scary that relies on me partnering with an organization or me partnering with other people or rounding up others, I know what has been said about me locally and just in general, like on social media, because of my view of what Jesus says for us to do. Like I go back to, I live in a town where it's 78% conservative. Mark Robinson won the governor, like got more than 50% of the votes for governor here in my county. And he self-described himself as a black Nazi. So like, that's the type of
Mm-hmm.
stuff I'm around. The big fundamentalist church is the most influential group in town. And yet we're in the 12th season. You guys know how I feel about Jesus and what I think we should be doing in terms of how we should be following him. I'm okay disagreeing in some of these places politically, but like how we treat other people, how we view them, how we speak of them is different than around here. And I know the things that have been said about me because of that difference in politics or difference in worldview by Christians. So when it comes to trusting other people to go after something Jesus has called me to do in this town, that's really hard because I'm going to be ostracized. My kids are going to be treated differently. My wife is going to be treated differently by people who say they care and love us too. And so for me in my context, if I'm 1,000% honest with myself right now, trusting Jesus to do the things he has invited me to do, I won't say called me to, but invited me to do, requires opening myself up to a hurt that I know will be there that, quite frankly, I don't want to experience again.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's tough because you've also like I don't experience that same thing because I do work with churches and ministries, but not as a primary. So I don't feel like it's affected my job as much. But man, it's like
Did I
sure
tell
has
you about the
affected.
referral that a church person gave somebody about me?
Yeah, I don't know if you shared it on the podcast, but I remember you telling me. Yeah.
There was a guy who called me, um, Christian guy, owns a business. He wanted me to help him with his messaging and his logo and his website, all the things that I do for a business. And he was referred to him by someone he knew from church in his past who is a very prominent person in the church communications world, which is like about half my business comes from churches.
Mm.
That person warned the potential client. He said, Jonathan's really good at what he does. He loves Jesus, but he's a liberal. Like
Whatever that means.
the guy felt my political views, which aren't super progressive. They're like,
No.
we deserve health care and immigrants should be treated fairly. Like that's almost the extent of my liberalism.
Mm.
Um, and public schools are a good thing. He thought those views were off-putting enough to warn someone about me. Yeah, he's good at what he does. He loves Jesus, but you got to know about this other thing about him. Like,
Yep.
it's just why? Why
Mm-hmm.
do we do that type of stuff?
Yeah. I don't know. I wish I had something insightful for that, but I don't know other than tribalism, other than, we it's the slippery slope of all or nothing. It's, well, if he believes this, then he must also believe this. Or if he doesn't believe this, then he must also believe this. It's the, jumping to conclusions and making assumptions based on limited information. The causality versus correlation and causality. Like that's not, because like I would consider myself a traditional conservative, but you're right. I also feel like immigrants should be treated fairly with respect and all these other kind of things. And even at this point where it's like, I know we weren't going to get political, but it's like, man, I don't want to increase the national debt. And guess what? Guess which party is trying to do that now? So it's like, so if I say I disagree with this economic financial side, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, Eric's a liberal or whatever, when it's like, this is bizarro land because this isn't where we used to be at all. And we've talked history before. You said we weren't going to go into history, but before the 1980s.
No, I said I wasn't going to research the history.
Oh, okay.
If the conversation takes us there, the conversation takes us there. We've been off notes the past 30 minutes.
Yeah, but like before the 1980s, before Reagan, before the religious right, remember there was no dependable voting bloc for Christians. In fact, politics wasn't really even a factor. And so it was like, now all of a sudden we're 40 years into that and we're going, oh man, this is how it's always been. It just quite frankly hasn't. But we've lost that way. And I think that's a main source of my lack of trust of people, is that, there are so many, which is probably my number one word on my bingo card, so many bad faith actors that have hijacked Christianity to the point where now it's no longer about the teachings of Jesus. It's about the teachings of Christian nationalism, cultural Christianity, or whatever you want to call it. And I can't trust that. It's the meme you see around this time of year where it's like, I'm a love your neighbor Christian, not a January 6th Christian. Like I'm a storm, and I'm not a storm the Capitol Christian. I'm a love your neighbor Christian. Like, why do you even have to say that? Oh, because like we've been hijacked by so many different outside forces that are not even related to Jesus.
I mean, on that note, you talk about how Christianity has become a voting bloc, and we're not going to make this whole thing about politics, but Ryan Burge tweeted out something the other day, and he said, in this survey, everyone gets asked if they self-ID as born again or evangelical Christian, even Jews and Muslims. There are non-Christians who identify as evangelical, and I don't think it's a survey error because it's strongly related to partisanship. GOP equals evangelical. And so we're at a point in our church history where what was a descriptor for our faith has been co-opted, taken over by a political group. So if you, because I'm 90% sure most of my beliefs fall into evangelical beliefs theologically, but I don't fit the boat politically. And so in my area,
like you said, they don't fit the application of those beliefs politically.
Yeah. So like in my area, 78% voted that way. And so there's only 22% of us that thought another way should have happened. Yeah. And I don't want to live in the negative of this the entire episode. And so I want to use that as a jumping point to how I want to close. And it's the reality that trusting Jesus requires us to trust other people, because our faith is not an individualistic faith. Christianity is not an individualistic religion. It is a collectivist religion, the one another's, the taking care of each other, we're called to do it together. And the tension of it all, good name for a podcast, is following Jesus requires us to trust other people. I don't know that we can be healthy and whole followers of Jesus without trusting other people. Because we can't just say, I trust Jesus, I don't trust anyone else. Because that's an incomplete gospel. For us to do the things he has called us to do, we have to do them with other people. And I think that's where my frustration and uneasiness has been. Because I'll be the first to admit, I don't think my relationship with Jesus is where it has been in the past. I'm not as close. Like the way I like to imagine when I talk about my relationship with Jesus, the way I describe it is I imagine the people following him when he was here on earth. There was a big giant parade behind him wherever he went. I'm absolutely a part of the parade right now.
Mm.
I'm part of the group walking to wherever he's going, but I'm not as close to the front of the pack as I have been in the past. It's because I took some body shots from some of the people that were up there.
Yeah.
And like, I'm still following him. I'm still going where he's going. I'm not going as quickly. I'm not going as intently or as um, excitedly, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Because for me to get back to the front of the pack, up to where he actually is going to require myself to be around, to be vulnerable enough to be hurt by the people who are there already,
Yeah.
or the people who are trying to get to him to use him for something else. Because to assume that everyone around him is there for good reasons is a false assumption,
Sure.
is an optimistic assumption, but probably not a realistic one.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest, currently where I am today, I do not have the emotional or physical energy to put my trust in those people to get to that place.
Mm.
And I admit that's an issue.
Sure.
If I'm honest, like that's an issue in my walk with Jesus, but it's where I am today.
Yeah, I think that imagery tracks for me a lot, and the more you talk about it, when we're talking about with the trust issue, is like, um, I started following Jesus in middle school when I was when I was not a part of the popular crowd. I've never been a part of the popular crowd, but was not a popular kid. Was left out. Was I had friends and stuff like that, but like I wasn't sitting at the Bean Girls table. And Jesus offered something for those kids and that person. And then slowly over time, it feels like, if you were to use your analogy, the front of the pack started to be taken over by the mean girls, um, who either weren't there for the right reasons or whatever else. And so, like, I kind of lost my trust in the pack. And so it's like, I don't want to go through what I felt like I had to go through before to try and stay at the front of the pack or to try and stay relevant to the other people in the pack, when in reality I just want to follow Jesus. And yes, you have to do that in community. um, but I think when my gaze gets turned towards the rest of the community as to what my example should be, or whether or not I'm doing the right thing, or how I look, and or if there's a client that's going to say, well, yeah, Eric loves Jesus but he's a liberal, you know like, that's when maybe the pack that I'm around isn't the right pack. And so for me, it's reframing what trust looks like and examining what the role of boundaries are in your relationship with Jesus. So my relationship with Jesus can be reckless, boundaryless, all that, fully trusting. My relationship with people needs to have some frame around trust and some boundaries, because people are not Jesus. We are the hands and feet of Jesus, but we are not Jesus. And so I am not called to trust the rest of the people in the pack the same way as I'm called to trust Jesus.
While admitting and acknowledging that our lack of trust of them is going to impact our relationship with Jesus. That's the hard part. And I don't have a nice, pretty bow to tie on this episode. Like, I don't want this to feel like a big downer. Like, we'll get into other things this season that aren't as emotionally depressing. But at the end of the day, like, I love Jesus. I will continue following him forever. Like, I have no plans or no desire to walk away from my faith in him.
Mm-hmm.
But The reality is my personal lived experiences put up a barrier to how close to him I get.
Mm.
And I don't think it's a lack of trust in him. I think it's a lack of trust in the other people, because if I give them every benefit of the doubt, they're just as broken as I am. So they probably don't trust me either, because I've done some stuff that have hurt people before, I'm sure of.
Sure.
Never intentionally, but I know I'm the villain in someone's story.
Yeah.
I didn't seek out being the villain in their story. If I probably don't even realize I am. If I am the villain in their story, they're not listening to this, but I apologize. Like, please tell me so I can apologize straight to you. But like that's never been my intention, just like it's probably not the intention of those who hurt me. I think back to when Ashley broke up with me in 2008. And we tried to do the whole friends thing. It didn't work because like I was just too hurt. But when we were trying to do that, I asked her when she knew that we were done.
Yeah.
And she had told me sometime in June or July. We broke up middle August.
Mm.
And I'm like, why didn't you just break up with me then? Why did you stay with me? And she's like, what? Did you want me to break up with you over the phone? So she thought she was doing what was best for me by stringing me along until she could break up with me in person. And my executive pastor thought he was doing what was best for me by hiring someone to go over me, not realizing he was demoting me. And I can go through all these situations where I was deeply hurt by people who thought they were doing the right thing
Yeah.
or thought they were doing what was in my best interest. And it's those people and those experiences that, to fully follow Jesus, I have to be okay with being hurt like that again.
Mm.
Because if good, Jesus loving people doing what they thought was best for me and what they thought they should do hurt me that bad, it's going to happen again.
Right.
And I don't want to get hurt like that. So I think, like I said, there's no pretty bow to tie on this. I just think we need to be honest with where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of the people who talk about church hurt and talk about being hurt by the church, I think they're in that spot that I just described. We want to follow Jesus. We want to go after him, but we know that doing that's going to require us to rely on people who are going to hurt us, and we don't want to be
Yep.
hurt again.
I think it's okay to acknowledge the hurt. It's okay to acknowledge where you're at. It's okay to acknowledge that you don't have to have it all figured out. And I think some of the knee jerk reactions to this tend to happen because people feel like they have to have it all figured out, when in reality, the definition of faith is believing in spite of the evidence, or with lack of evidence. And I think that's part of it too. Is like, if you see all the places where Jesus interacted with people, they were in the middle. They were in the middle of of a faith journey. They were not at the end, right? So I just kind of take heart in, not that he's overcome the world. I take heart in knowing that he is uh, he, he's the Jesus of the woman caught in adultery. He's the Jesus of the woman at the well. He's the Jesus of Lazarus. He's the Jesus of Mary and Martha. He's the Jesus of Amazon deliveries. He's the Jesus of what? I mean,
UPS.
UPS. There you go. But no, he's the Jesus of the middle, and I think that if you're in the middle right now, the best bow I can put on there is, the church may be really bad at dealing with people in the middle, but Jesus is not.
So wherever you're at, if you're not comfortable being towards the front of the pack, I invite you to walk in the middle with us. Like, we can still see
or in the
Jesus.
back with me, baby. Yeah. Come on, hang out back here. It's fun. Yeah. Woo.
But wherever you are,
I never see you guys up there. You're great. That's fine. Just keep walking. I got you. I'll be there. Don't you worry.
Wherever you need to be on the journey, though, I hope you can trust us enough to continue walking with you on it. And when we inevitably screw up and do something to hurt you, I preemptively apologize because that was not my intention. But yeah, that's it for this week. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, this topic, we would love to hear more from you. Feel free to reach out to us on social or send an email to us to continue the conversation. Eric is at EricW712 on all the major platforms. I am at Jonathan_Corona on them as well. You can email us at hello@tensionpodcast.com. If you want to send a story for our 100th episode, send those to hello@tensionpodcast.com or to me on Instagram. Next week, we're going to continue this idea of honest conversations we're not having with one that, unfortunately, I have had to think about a lot over the last 6 years. And that's the idea that I know heaven will be great, but I don't want to get there anytime soon. So if you've experienced death and loss in your story, we'll be talking about some of that next week. If you want that episode when it first comes out, subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app if you haven't already. If you like the show, do us a favor and rate us and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this episode with a friend if you found it interesting. As always, thanks for making us a part of your day, and we'll talk to you again next week. We hope you have a great week. See ya.